now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Aloha, everybody. I just minimized my screen by mistake. There we go. Aloha, everybody. This is Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin on the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com or freedomslips.com. And today we have the incredible Richard-Dolan, who is one of the world's leading researchers and writers on the subject of UFOs. And he believes that they constitute the greatest mystery of our time, and I agree. He is the author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State, both groundbreaking works which together provide the most factually complete and accessible narrative of the UFO subject available anywhere. He also co-authored a speculative book about the future, AD After Disclosure, the first ever analysis not only of how UFO secrecy might end, but of the all-important question, what happens next? Richard's latest work is UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, and provides a fresh treatment of the entire subject. In it, he discusses the important sightings, the encounters, the politics, the cover-up, ancient aliens, the bizarre science disclosure, and offers advice on being both critical and open-minded in today's world. Like his previous 3 books, it asks fresh questions and offers new insights to further our understanding of the UFO mystery. And Richard also hosts a weekly radio show, The Richard-Dolan Show, on KGRA Radio. He's a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. He is currently featured on several television series and documentaries, slow down, Janet, including Ancient Aliens, Hangar 1, The UFO Files, and Close Encounters. And there's a longer list and a longer bio posted on aquarianradio.com, and he's got websites. What is his website? richard-dolanpress.com. And before we bring on Richard, Sasha, Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say?
Okay, now that we have Richard-Dolan here, I find it useful to have 3 categories of things we discuss. One, the stuff is that we have strong evidence for. Perhaps that's the 1 beer category. Then likely speculation, the 1 joint category. And since he's read everything, I'm going to ask for a 2 joint wild speculation. And I know that you probably will feel comfortable. He's immersed himself in so much data that I really want to hear the wild speculation as well as the likely and the strongly evidentiary.
And Richard, I've seen you evolve, learn, grow. You're just an incredible person. I greatly admire you, and I'm so excited to have you here and want to hear what's the latest and greatest. I saw you at Contact in the Desert, and you were awesome, awesome, awesome. So take it away, Richard. What would you like to tell our listeners?
Hi, Janet and Sasha. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be on here with both of you guys. I love talking with you every time. I enjoyed seeing you at Contact. And, I keep myself very busy. I've, as you mentioned, I've been immersed in the world of the UFO phenomenon for a little over 20 years now. And I tend to take a factual approach, at least in my some of my more serious works, my 2 volumes of history, definitely factual, archival to base research. But as Sasha was pointing out as well, I'm look, this is a subject, UFO subject, that is a truly great mystery, and one in which, we need to speculate. And, bodies need bones, history needs facts, that's true, but based on the facts that we have, there's a lot of room for wondering and speculating as to what kind of interesting permutations are out there. So I like to think about that. I like to kick ideas around. It's, in fact, how my mind really naturally works. I think I have a natural curiosity about a lot of things, and the book that I'm working on right now is actually not a UFO-related book at all. It is a book on the history of false flag operations, primarily in the 20th and 21st century. I'm doing that. I'm trying to make that a comprehensive work, and maybe if we have time, we can kick that around as well. So Yeah, I mean, I'm
hear about
very a history and politics sort of thinker. I've gotten into the fascinating mystery of UFOs, but I've never left history and politics either.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the false flag thing really gets to me, and I'm just wondering how many of these world-shattering conflicts that we've been in have, for example, the story that Roosevelt ordered the fleet in Pearl Harbor to be not to be in defensive position, even though he knew Yamamoto was coming. So that there would be plenty of casualties, and that we could bomb the Japanese, and Hitler would declare war on us, and then Roosevelt could save Britain, stuff like that.
Right.
So,
there's something to that. I mean, if you want to jump in on Pearl Harbor, hey, why not? I think that's you wouldn't technically call that a false flag, because after all, the Japanese did in fact bomb Pearl Harbor. It's not that the United States did it and blamed it on the Japanese. But your point is very well taken, in that there has been an argument over the last couple of decades. It was ridiculed at first, and generally speaking, academic historians in the U.S. do not they don't go there too much, but there is a small and very persuasive, or at least a very vocal group of academicians who do believe this, and that arguing that the U.S. had cracked the Japanese encrypted codes, which they did, and had the knowledge that the Japanese were planning this attack was available to American intelligence. And so the question is, did they allow this to happen? There's certainly ample motivation. The United States public opinion at the time was dead set against any kind of intervention in either Pacific or European wars. Roosevelt was committed to support for the Allied powers, basically Britain. So, having a pretext was critically important, and Pearl Harbor obviously was that. What I would say about false flags in general is that they are a part of our world today. They are kind of a structural part of our world. In other words, the way that what we call the modern world has evolved has almost demanded the creation of false flags. And just basically speaking, I would say there's a couple of key things that force this upon us. One is that we've gone into an era in which wars are considered immoral, really since World War I. So we have a situation where, the League of Nations and then the United Nations would say, wars of aggression are immoral. And that doesn't stop nations from wanting to have war. So you start to have pretext for engaging in them. And then the other reason false flags are becoming ubiquitous is the sort of pretext of democracy. And I say pretext, the veneer of democratic institutions. In other words, there's very few nations in this world anymore that at least don't pretend in one way or another to be democratic. I mean, a few. Saudi Arabia doesn't pretend, North Korea. But most nations actually will pretend that they are democratic in nature. And what that means is that there has to be at least a pretense of paying attention to public opinion. And so for certain things to be justified, it's become more and more necessary to corral the public in a certain way to control them, right? And, through propaganda, through lies and spin, and the ultimate weapon in the propaganda toolkit is the false flag. So it's kind of part of the way of the world. And what I've also said in our modern world of the 21st century, if there were a false flag Olympics, the United States wins the gold medal hands down, and there's reasons for this.
Yes.
It has to do with American geopolitics internationally, and also America as the leader of globalization. So you really need to clamp down domestically on dissent, and for that, false flags are very helpful. And then you need to have pretext for regime change and wars that can never otherwise be justified. False flags are useful for that. So the U.S. really runs that, and U.S. also has domination over global news media, which really helps. You've got to have control over the message. So all of these come into play, and then the development of high-level covert op teams, which is now out there. And in other words, it's very difficult now to see when something big happens in the news. Like, is it a definite false flag? Is it something where a government or an intelligence agency kind of allows something to happen that they know is going to happen? Is that considered a false flag? I would say kind of yes. There's this spectrum. We've got so what I'm trying to do in this book, and analytically at least, is to help it's not simply a list of like the last 100 false flags that I think were false flags, although I deal with them. But I think more important, to be honest with you, is to have the proper analytical framework for grasping this phenomenon and seeing all the nuance now that has become. False flags aren't the same as what they were when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. That was a false flag too, but they're much more sophisticated now. And this is part of my method. My mission is to kind of explain that sophistication.
What do you look for when you're trying to determine whether it's been, staged or not?
Well, that's an interesting question, Sasha. So ultimately, every event requires investigative journalism that's really going to look for problems. But I think we can almost kind of create profiles of a false flag. They say they talk about racial profiling. Well, I would talk about false flag profiling, and there are certain things that a false flag is likely to have, and if it has many of these things, then we need to start looking a little more carefully at it. So one thing right off the bat, it's a high-profile event. Typically, it's something that's traumatic, either a mass killing, major threat. It's usually something that I find is symbolic in one way or another. In other words, you've got look at 9/11. You have an attack on the United States financial center, the United States military. These are some symbolic targets, and you see this in other parts of the world too, where a lot of the targets are symbolic. But what you often will see is like instant media saturation running simultaneously on a major news stream. But with initially, like in the first day or two, you will see competing narratives out there. Typically, you look for local news affiliates that will have different information than what consolidates over the next few days. Like in the case of shootings, you'll have reports initially that may point to multiple gunmen rather than one. This happened in a number of the shooting cases, whether Aurora, Colorado, San Bernardino, or like in the case of 9/11, competing narratives that say that one of the planes was shot down, rather than taken down by patriotic passengers. And what you find is after a few days that those competing narratives go away and an establishment narrative comes in. The case becomes quickly closed. A patsy or someone is found, cover story is offered. You get a unified media blitz. No other opinions are offered, and usually the patsy's either killed off or he's captured and never seen again. Like in the case of the Boston Marathon, you get one brother is murdered right on the spot, and then the other one is taken off to a kangaroo court, never seen again. Then you see slogans. This is an interesting aspect of false flags. It's almost like they were cooked up on Madison Avenue. Like after 9/11, these colors don't run, or Boston Strong, or Je suis Charlie. This Je suis Charlie, you have to wonder, within a day or 2 days, you have thousands, maybe millions for all I know, thousands of these signs, Je suis Charlie, exactly manufactured at the same facility. Boom, they just go right out there. It's like, boom, someone's ready to create these slogans to help create emotional buy-in to the event. What you often will find, I think most significantly with these, is that there's a narrative that immediately comes out, corporate media narrative that will demonize the target group one way or the other, but then basically promote a solution to prevent future atrocities. Usually these mean greater police state measures, march to war, and so on. So you have a media that promotes a problem, guides a reaction, offers a solution, and it's like right out of the bat. Classic example, I guess, in our history would be the USA Patriot Act, but there are others. After the Boston event, you have the militarization of the National Police Force, essentially, and it comes right out as a result of Boston. After some of these other measures, you have increasing legislation to monitor civilians in terms of psychological profiling for safety. Usually these laws are ready to go, and they're just rolled right out. So
it took years. It took years to write up the Patriot Act and to have the troops ready to invade Afghanistan. It took a long time to prepare for that.
The Patriot Act was written before 9/11. I think everyone knows this, and it was written by a fellow named John Y.U. In fact, who is I think he immigrated from Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken. You can come in from anywhere and become an empire-building neocon. It really doesn't matter where you come from. You can join the club, and that was his case. The thing is, there's one difficulty in identifying something as a false flag as opposed to simply evil opportunism. Because both of these things are part. In other words, there are events, right, that do happen and that are not always the result of an intelligence community operation. Sometimes things happen. And the author Naomi Klein, of whom I'm a very big fan, has argued in her book, The Shock Doctrine, that this is a big part of our world. In other words, the ruling clique in the United States rules by shock and awe domestically as well as internationally, rules by trauma. So she'll argue that some bad thing happens, whether it's Hurricane Katrina or 9/11, and she doesn't talk about 9/11 as false flag. But these horrible things happen, and then what she argues, and I think she's right, is that there are plans that have long been in place and that are rolled out when people are traumatized. They are looking to the state for help. This is the golden opportunity to, have a corporate takeover of New Orleans or to roll out the national security apparatus or whatever. And so the way she frames it, it seems to me, is almost like waiting for the event to happen and then opportunistically jumping in and taking advantage. And I think that is a part of our world, but I would go a step further and say that some of these events are manufactured, they are made, and that's a genuine false flag. Distinguishing between the two is not always easy, because you can really see now in our world there are cases where a government or an agency might just like slightly nudge something along and let someone do something that they might have been able to stop, for example. I mean, after all, with Snowden's revelations, it seems to me that the NSA basically can see anything they want to see at any time in real time. You'd think they'd be able to stop some of these crazy shootings or some of these crazy other events that happen, and yet they still happen. And I speculate that some of these are simply allowed for promoting an agenda. I mean, if 25 or 50 people die, I think in the opinion of some of these individuals, they honestly literally do not care if it promotes their own agenda. So these are things to look for. The other thing that I think is critical, is interesting about false flags, just to look up in terms of a profile, is the existence of multiple drills. Multiple drills. So in other words, what I mean by that is, you see this on 9/11. You see this in the London tube bombing of July 7th, 2005. You see this in San Bernardino. You see this in the Aurora shooting. The running of drills shortly before or during the actual attack that often involve the actual sequence of events that take place. In other words, with 9/11, there were drills that were taking place at that time by the U.S. military to protect against terrorist attacks in which hijacked planes would slam into American buildings in major cities. They were planning to defend against that when it happened. The London tube bombings of July 7th in 2005, same thing. You got to wonder, really, coincidence? Well, I think this is very significant. I think the reasons for this, one is to, I think, create confusion during that attack. If a drill is taking place, people are wondering, wait, is this real or is this not real? What's the deal? But I think primarily, even more importantly, is to use the drill as a cover for the planning and execution of the attack. So, for example, if I'm in the intelligence community and you are in the intelligence community and I'm planning the attack and you're not part of the plan, but you find out about this, I can simply say to you, oh, no, we're planning a drill. It's cool. And you would think, okay, fine. And so there would be this deniability within the command structure. And I think that's the value of multiple drills. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that false flags are not a static phenomenon. In other words, they have evolved over the last century, and they will continue to evolve. And one of the reasons that they will continue now is that researchers like ourselves, and a lot of people looking into this, are noticing these problems, right? So we have to expect that anyone who is engineering a false flag, they're going to be onto this as well, and they'll have to adapt their own methods. So there may not be multiple drills in the future. There may be something else happens. This is a very dynamic field, and it's so being Richard, done to consolidate. I'll just finish. This is being done to consolidate control, I would say, globally through what we might call a neoliberal and neoconservative agenda. That is transnational globalization and empire.
So where do you begin your false flag investigation? What's the oldest one that you are identifying as? You said a century. Yeah, what's the first one you're looking at?
Well, I've tried when I started. I'm really glad we're talking about false flags incident. It was a fascinating subject, and hopefully we'll get into UFOs later, right?
Oh yes, we will.
So
We have 2 hours.
when I started looking into false flags about a year and a half ago, I was inclined to accept what I was reading on the web, and a lot of websites typically would say that false flags are in fact an ancient phenomenon. Many of them would cite the burning of Rome and the Emperor Nero, who did in fact blame the burning of Rome on Christians, who were a new minority group at the time, very unpopular for most of the Romans, in fact. They're weird cults, essentially, is what they were seen as. And it is true Nero did blame the burning of Rome on the Christians, and there's no evidence, really, to attribute that to them. And they said that's a false flag. I'm hesitant to call that a false flag. From the Roman historians back then, there's, I think, four or five sources. I've looked at them all. And I don't see this. It does seem to me that Nero was well out of town at the time it began. It's always possible. I see this as a piece of opportunism by Nero to blame the Christians and then to use the burning of Rome to justify the building of this ridiculous palace. When you go, even if that was a false flag, it would be an outlier. It would be an exception to the rule. False flags are not a part of the ancient world in general, and there are specific reasons why they are not. The ancient world had a different structural reality to what we have in our world today, and it wouldn't create false flags as a rule. Ancient culture in general would have considered false flags actually a breach of honor. There was a code of honor that would exist. They'd go to your town, they'd kill every man, woman, and child in sight. They wouldn't have any problem with that. But a false flag would be a different sort of a thing. The first real identifiable international false flag that I could find was actually as late as 1788. It was done by Sweden, believe it or not, against Russia. Crazy story. It's fascinating. Essentially, the Swedish king was persuaded by Britain and Germany and the Netherlands to have a fake attack against him by the Russians. They wanted to justify a war with Russia. The English were fighting Russia down in the Crimea region, on and off, and they wanted to divert the Russians. So what they did, the Swedish king was not a bright man. He was easily persuaded. He actually got the head of the Royal Opera House in Stockholm to manufacture Russian Cossack uniforms and to then stage an attack on a border town between Sweden and Russia. Back then, Sweden controlled Finland. And it actually kind of worked. It's funny. Back then, just as now, there were truthers, I guess you could say. There were people who did not believe that this was a genuine attack. But they were a minority. Basically, there was a rudimentary press in Sweden at the time which parroted the government line: "We've been attacked by Russia. We must attack back." And that's definite false flag. Sweden got their butts kicked, incidentally, in that war. It was a bad idea for the Swedes to take on the Russians, but there you go. You get real false flags. The true era of false flags, I argue, begins after the First World War. All right, after Europe is militarized, after much of the world becomes militarized by that horrible conflagration. And you start seeing false flags by basically the fascists or the dictatorships. So Germany and Japan do false flags in the 30s. Russia, the Soviet Union, does false flags through the 30s. And this is like the Reichstag fire and the invasion of Manchuria was false flags by Japan and so on. And the Russians did a false flag against Finland in World War II. These are military actions. The Pearl Harbor event is a little different, but definitely it's a sneaky and it's a mysterious event, and I think it's a quasi-false flag. But the main thing is... yeah, go on.
I was just that there's several authors, Kasdan and others, have said that it's since Operation Paperclip, where the top Nazis, Allen Dulles brought Nazis into the CIA,
right,
and the scientists were brought in, that this initiated a hijacking of the timeline, so to speak, and, as though we were always a democratic, upfront, not a sneaky kind of a power. But I don't believe that, and I just wondered what your take on was the Operation Paperclip the real changeover for the clandestine operations of the United States?
I would say Paperclip was, in a sense, a kind of swallowing of a poison pill by the United States. Yes, I think that I would argue that Paperclip involved a lot of different things. First of all, it did involve the importation of a lot of the Nazi scientists and the scientists and intel guys. So it was spooks and scientists. The scientists, I would say, were a little bit more highly prized, but so were the spies. And in the attitude of the Americans post-World War II, the unfortunate fact that some of these Nazis were irredeemable, unrepentant Nazis was, maybe not the best thing, but hey, they had a lot of information on the Russians, and we need that. Or, hey, they have a lot of really good science that they've done due to their horrific experimentations during World War II, or whatever. Some of the Nazi scientists some of them were genius-level people. They were highly coveted. Mm-hmm. So, but what I would say, a couple of things. First of all, with Dulles, you mentioned him. Alan Dulles was personally responsible for bringing in the entire intelligence operation run by a guy named Reinhard Gehlen, who ran Hitler's Abwehr, who ran all of Hitler's intelligence agency during World War II. Gehlen was an expert on Russia. He was an expert on the Soviet Union, and Dulles absolutely wanted Gehlen brought into the fledgling CIA operation, which he succeeded in doing. Interesting thing about Gehlen's operation, they were not the official West German intelligence agency. There was the Bundesnachrichtendienst was the official, but everyone knew that Gehlen's operation was the real deal, and they had way more status. But the fact is that you had these hardcore Nazis brought into U.S. intel, brought into U.S. scientific R&D within the military, and there were definite relations between those Nazis in the U.S. and the Nazis that were in South America. This has been really studied, I think, very definitively. People like Joseph Farrell, I think, have really nailed it, and others say, indicating you had this really a global Nazi post-World War II Nazi communications network that they had a lot of money because they stole billions of dollars worth of gold out of Germany at the end of World War II, known as the Rat Lines. They maintained their power very covertly after the war, and I do believe they had a poisoning of the United States, intelligence community. The U.S. intelligence community would have become evil on its own, just by virtue of the fact that what the U.S. was trying to do after World War II. The U.S. owned all the money in the world, and they wanted to maintain that disparity, and that was their explicit goal. So anytime you're trying to do that, it'll force you to do evil things. But I think bringing in these Nazis did not help the matter. That's my take on it.
Can we put a bookmark here and go back to the UFO stuff? And we can always come back to this at the end of the show. But I
love talking about UFOs. That's my number one love. So yes, let's do it.
Are you done? Are you complete for now, Sash?
For now.
Okay, we can always come back.
I hope I'm having a good time here with you guys. This is fun.
Me too.
I am too. I wanted to talk to you so many times during the conference, but you were like the rock star, and then there was always a bunch of groupies around you, so I never got in there.
Oh, really?
One time. Oh yeah, that's okay. Someday we'll sit down and have tea or something or coffee. I'm really curious about your current perspectives on the abduction contactee phenomenon. And then the last time we talked, you weren't really talking about ancient aliens too much, and now you're on ancient aliens and all that stuff. Or at least the last. I was looking up our shows. I couldn't find one in between. It was actually 2014, I think, the last time we had you on, which is a shame. We got to have you on at least once or twice a year. Let's start with the contactee experiencer phenomenon. What are your current thoughts, ideas, whatever?
Well, thank you. I've recently been trying to look at the various explanations for the UFO phenomenon in general. Everyone's heard of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and there's different variations of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I had to name some of them myself because I don't think they had names. The Buck Rogers variant, the ancient astronaut variant, the space brother variant. And then you've got different other hypotheses to explain this, whether we're talking about, the straight-up skeptical hypothesis, just as it's all a big mistake based on faulty evidence, or the psychosocial hypothesis that has a very good argument as well, saying that the human mind creates this phenomenon which conforms to our cultural and psychological expectations. There's something to be said for that. There's an interdimensional hypothesis which says that these entities, these UFOs and aliens, are actually interdimensional, maybe conducting their own psychological operation.
There's an inner Earth one, too.
Absolutely. Then you've got what I call the parallel development hypothesis. Basically, was there another species or a secret advanced civilization that has always been here, somehow in secret? It's possible. You got time travel hypotheses. Human beings from the future maybe coming back interested in our genetics. It's one variation. You've got the secret tech hypothesis, basically black budget, maybe going back to the Nazis or maybe before. Who knows? There's my favorite interesting new hypothesis that I've been exploring, I guess I would call, is called the simulation hypothesis, which simply means that we are artificial and sentient algorithms within a comprehensive virtual reality simulation. That's kind of a mind-blowing thing, and there's something to be said for that. When you look at all of those, the extraterrestrial hypothesis almost seems a little boring. You're thinking, wow, people coming in from another planet in metal spaceships, can we do a little better than that? So having said all of that, I'm trying to look at all of this with as fresh a mind as possible. I would still suggest that an extraterrestrial hypothesis still makes a great deal of sense when we look at a combination of things: officially documented cases, alleged encounters with beings that people attest to many, many times. In other words, experiencer testimony and research. I think a lot of these do point plausibly to some kind of extraterrestrial presence here on Earth. So relating to those cases you're asking about, Janet, I would say that, yes, I'm very, very interested in contact cases. In my journey into this field, I don't consider myself, strictly speaking, an abduction researcher, but I can tell you I've talked with many scores, maybe hundreds of people who have had apparent abduction experiences, or, if not abduction experiences, bizarre one-on-one encounters with beings who just do not seem like they are from here. So some of them look totally human, but they don't seem human. I've run into some of these very bizarre cases. I'll mention one right off the bat. I had a couple of these where I had a case where I spoke to a retired U.S. Air Force colonel with a PhD. He's a brilliant man. I met him and his wife. They told me together of an encounter they had in the Las Vegas casino a number of years ago with a friend of theirs who they described as a kind of a psychic individual. So the three of them were having fun in this Vegas casino, and the psychic friend grabbed the colonel by the arm and said, "Stop, that woman over there is not like us." And she motioned to an extremely, apparently a very beautiful blonde woman, dressed to the nines, like perfectly. Beautiful blue clothing. And she was, in Las Vegas you get beautiful people, but apparently this was like an extraordinarily beautiful woman. The psychic and the colonel's wife actually became afraid of this woman, and they went down the escalator to get away. The colonel stayed, and he was looking at the woman for a moment, and he said to me, she turned slightly, and he heard her in his mind. He said it was startling, and what he heard her thinking to him was essentially, it was like a police officer on the beat. It was like, "Nothing to see here. Keep it moving, buddy. This is nothing that's concerning you." And this is what he's hearing from her. And he's startled. He's like, what is... And at that moment, she is joined by an equally beautiful blonde man dressed in equally beautiful blue clothing. And they're conferring. They're obviously together. And then they start walking toward the escalator close to where he's standing. And he's thinking, great, I'm going to talk to them. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say something. So as they walk by him, he says nothing at all. And he's like, damn it. But then he gets behind them on the escalator, and they're going down the escalator. And as he's telling me this, his wife, by the way, interjects into the story. She says, "Oh, my God, I remember. My friend and I were just hiding behind one of the slot machines, peeking our head out." Like she was laughing as she said this. But anyway, the colonel said to me, again, that he heard them thinking. I said, they weren't talking. He says, "I'm telling you, they were not talking. They were thinking. I heard them thinking." And their conversation went something like, "Yes, he hears us. Yes, he's really not important. He's not part of anything. Just ignore him and we'll just do our thing. Or that was the gist of the thought he was getting. They get to the bottom of the escalator. They simply walk off. That's the end of them. But the story does not end. So the psychic friend also does or did hypnotic regression. And the three of them are talking, and they agree that she will regress the colonel so that he can better remember the details of the conversation. That's the idea. So they're like, all right, cool. So they decide that they're going to go to her. He'll go to her house in like a couple of days. She's in Eastern California. And he's there. 2 days later, he's there, and he's lying on the couch. She's starting to regress him. And as she's regressing him, they hear construction noise outside, loud jackhammers and trucks. And she lives in a dead-end street. They're like, what the heck is this? They go outside. They see nothing. Every time she tries to regress him, the noise starts up. It gets so that they cannot continue the regression. They say, no problem. He says, I will be here again next month, and we'll do it again. She says, great. A month goes by. He calls her. He says, hey, I'm going to be at your I'm going to be in your area in the next day or so. How about we do that regression? She says, what regression? He says, the regression that we did last month. What regression? The people we saw in Las Vegas. She had no memory of any of this. She had no memory. She lost her total memory of the event. So that's the full story. And not to belabor this, I had a very similar story from a woman who lives in western Pennsylvania on the other side of the country. She had a very similar experience with these ultra beautiful blonde telepathic beings when she was in a church in western Pennsylvania back in the mid-1960s. When she was a teenager, she heard them thinking as well. She followed them out of the church. And she went down a hill, and they walked toward this tall being who she said looked just like Lurch from the Addams Family TV show. Frightened her. She stopped going after them, and they walked into the woods, and this tall figure turned around and followed them into the woods, and that was her story. And I've encountered a number of other people who have told me of these bizarre telepathic encounters. Now, this doesn't prove that these beings are extraterrestrials. I understand that. But there's something very strange. You've got to wonder, who are these beings? Now, if you know, there's a lot of...
I've encountered them. So that's exactly what happened. Yes, I have encountered... Well, when I asked who you are, they said we're the Anunnaki. And they got taller and taller as I grew more comfortable with looking at them. I don't want to go into it here. I will tell you in person the whole story because it's quite long. But yes, you can hear it's like concepts. You don't really get words, individual words, so to speak. You get entire like paragraphs and concepts of what they're saying. So that's why he said it was kind of like they said this, because you're getting a concept.
Yes, this is very much. Yeah. This is very much the way that the Colonel described his kind of reading of these other people. Like which is why they wanted to do the regression, because he was getting clear ideas, but I got the feeling from him that he was not getting like a word for word literal.
And then I had a shared experience, and then we talked about it in great length over like 2 or 3 years, and then he came back to 5 years later, and he said, "That didn't happen. I don't remember anything." Same thing. It's like, oh my God.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
there's a lot of this is going on. What's interesting about this field of ours, of course, is, as you guys know, and I think as some listeners know too, is once you start scratching the surface of this very bizarre reality that we live in, you find that there's a lot of this actually. And it's all, none of it gets acknowledged by our kind of establishment vision of reality, but it's there. So there's this great discrepancy between, you know, like in the story of Alice in Wonderland, Alice goes down the hole. She falls, boom, she's in Wonderland, where this is totally different reality. I've often thought of that we live in Wonderland every time we turn on our television or our mainstream media that gives us this fantasy reality that actually does not really exist. And in truth, we're living a very bizarre reality, but that's never being discussed at all. We're living in this kind of created fiction. But actually, the real reality that we live in is much more bizarre, in fact, than anything that is acknowledged.
You know, one thing I find useful is instead of saying you have to follow one or another of these hypotheses, but to look at things that's multi-causal in a field. So, for example, there's a lot of evidence that I've been looking at about the inner world, Agartha, and the talk that the Nazis had relocated to New Schwabenland under the ice and found even deeper civilizations like Bodland and Agartha even further in, and that these people had round-wing anti-gravs, and that these and they were also, the Nazis too, were capable of and actually had space travel as well as travel into Earth. And so I find that if you can put a whole bunch of these causes together, and I think you've got the question is, what's the most predictive model? What do you get as the most predictive model of what's coming down?
That's a good question, Sasha. I've often entertained some of these ideas about Nazis, and I've tried looking at the Antarctica thesis myself. I've never found myself completely believing all aspects of it. I don't rule some of that out, but I would say that we are in how would I put this? If I were to give my sum total of the generic scenario, I would go step by step. I would say, first of all, there have been retrievals of exotic technology in bodies, things like at Roswell, also Cape Girardeau and other places, so that there have been crash retrievals. That's one thing I would start by saying. And these have been kept secret. It's been very, very important to keep this secret because the technology is revolutionary and would disrupt our society. On top of which there have been, and this is absolutely documented, no question about it, there have been significant classified engagements by the military with these objects. In other words, there's trouble in paradise. So that not only did we recover something, but it wasn't a one-off. They're here, they're doing something. Someone is flying around doing things that are not supposed to be the case. So with that, those two factors require the necessity for absolute secrecy on the part of the powers that be. That's their conclusion. They're like, we cannot discuss this. This is too revolutionary, too crazy. So that requires basically the creation of a totalitarian system. Control over the media, control over academia, control over science. You must manage them. And if anyone doubts this, they doubt that, we can control the world of science, I'd just say, wake up. Study this. Study how media is controlled, how academia is controlled. It's not that hard. You create black budgets, that is secret classified spending, that is an end run around constitution and legality, criminal financing, illegal financing, that is drug trafficking, banking fraud. All of this stuff creates money by which to manage these programs, because you can't just go to Congress for them and have them approve that. That's a great way to give the secret away. So you have private slush funds, and that creates runaway secrecy that is fundamentally privatized. We don't really have public government anymore. That doesn't exist. So what we have is government that's run by private money. I think we can all see this. This is also the case with the UFO secret. Private money dominates, and they are involved in creating secret tech programs, i.e., how to create your own flying saucer, how to go off-world. Yes, I think they're absolutely working on that, and I think they've made breakthroughs. They're also working on weaponizing these technologies. They're military, after all. They want to create new electromagnetic frequencies and everything else related to that, which leads to what I have often called a breakaway civilization, that is a classified world that has gotten so advanced, basically on steroids, with ET technology tossed in, that they've made breakthroughs in science and tech that have taken them fundamentally beyond our own civilization, with breakthroughs in energy, breakthroughs in propulsion, breakthroughs in science and cosmology. And that doesn't mean that they're all living on the moon, but it does mean that maybe they can if they want to. I think the action's still on Earth. This is Earth. We've got life here. We've got all this genetic diversity. I think this is a much more interesting place than Mars. So I think there's still the action going on here. But yes, I think that exists. I think they are desperately attempting to catch up to these others, whoever these others are, hiding all their breakthroughs in energy and propulsion. I think they're paralyzed in terms of the whole disclosure issue. And I've had email exchanges with some of these individuals, I think, who have really said to me, look, you talk about disclosure, but you have to understand, we are absolutely terrified of going to prison. Because if this comes out, people can talk all they want about, oh yeah, we'll give you immunity, but we'll believe that when we see it, that the pitchforks and torches will still come out from some people, and They just are, the CYA rule applies here. And I think more fundamentally, they're terrified of a global transformation that will definitely occur if this secret comes out. I mean, look, you think, if the president were to say, if people talk now, oh, Hillary Clinton will disclose. Well, I'm not ever going to believe that. Do not believe that. And my very good friends and colleagues, Greg Cameron, and he believes it. Stephen Bassett believes it. I do not believe it. I respectfully disagree with them. If any president were to bring this out, how long would it take before independent people start saying, wait a minute, if that's real, then what do those flying saucers use to go from point A to point B? It's probably not fossil fuels. Whatever that answer is, implicit in a post-disclosure world is a post-petroleum world, because we're going to figure it out. And that transforms the entire global power structure. That transforms everything that the United States does, because it runs the world on the petroleum system. We're totally up for it, I know. But those people running our show, our puppet masters, I'm here to say, like, they're not interested. They have too much to lose. So that's the basic scenario. That doesn't include the discussion
of these other beings. Well, that's if you stay inside of this matrix, this lower paradigm. But one of the things we're taking it up to a spiritual level, and how is this unfolding as the cosmic play that we've all agreed to participate in. And so in our research, we go to the current, to the ancient aliens, and into, and you mentioned you were studying yoga, so we go into the spirituality, the yoga and Tantra.
I love my yoga.
And when you tie all these in, well, Tantra is the advanced yoga, and that allows you to awaken your Kundalini and go outside and to connect to Source and remember who you are, before you decide to come into physical incarnation. And if we get all these different parts of it, then you get an even broader picture of how we can do this, so that it's a win for all, not just somebody going to jail or getting killed because they did participate in this play that we're.
I would love to talk about yoga in the context of this for a moment. I've never talked about yoga in connection to the UFO phenomenon, but it is true. I'm a yoga practitioner. I wouldn't say I'm a particularly amazing yogi, but I love yoga, and I will do it till my last day on earth. And I would say, like, I look to yoga not to give. I mean, everyone looks at it differently. I do not look to yoga for it to give me like amazing spiritual powers. I practice it as a spiritual discipline. That is true, and in fact I practice Kundalini yoga among other forms of yoga, and I will always, I love doing Kundalini yoga. But I feel what yoga does for me is first of all, it's very healthy, but it provides to me the ultimate mind-body coordination, the ultimate mind-body synchronicity, I suppose I could say, and it provides a kind of mental discipline that, in relation to these other beings, all right, through the meditation that you do, because yoga is moving meditation, and if by doing that, it is my opinion that these other beings, for example, I do think they came here from elsewhere. I think they have incredibly advanced technology. I think they can manipulate space-time. I think some of them are artificially created organisms. I think they have astonishing powers of the mind. But I also think that they are unbelievably intensely telepathic. And so they would be interested in those of us who demonstrate capabilities in somehow understanding the non-locality of our being, right? And those of us who are able to detach, as it were, from this mere physical confines into the realms that these other beings can inhabit a little more easily than most of us. So in other words, if you're scouting around humanity or Earth, and you see a bunch of people watching virtual reality or following the Kardashians, you're not going to be that interested in them. But if you see some of these people doing meditation and focusing on the actual way of expanding their own consciousness, you're going to find them more interesting. And it is these individuals, frequently, we hear this anecdotally all the time, who will report, they'll say this is typical. Yes, I started meditating, and after 2 years, boom, I had this amazing experience with this other intelligence, or I had this incredible download, or, we've all heard this. It's hard to quantify this. It's hard to prove it. But my take on it is that you see this enough, it's out there enough, that I say, yes, let's accept this. Let's take this as a working hypothesis, and frankly, it makes sense to me.
Did you want to say something? Sasha's a yoga master. Go ahead.
What I find very interesting is in tantric yoga, especially when you do it in a group form with a intense, with a common practice, your aim is to transcend your sense of separation and be open to whatever is, and not be confined to the consciousness of your skin-encapsulated self-sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's extremely powerful. And I've been conducting combinations of yoga and Groff holotropic breath work for groups, and continually people have the kind of experiences that we would say are non-local experiences. Now, what they're experiencing, there's no objective way, and there's no objective way to talk about what's past and future either, because they're all held in the present as well. But we can say that people report experiences.
Yeah. Hey, let's do yoga together. Like, next time I see you guys, I would love to do yoga with you.
Okay.
Like I would be totally up for that. When I do these conferences, like, there's never time to do yoga. I miss doing it, and if we're at the same place, we should do it. Like, we should do some yoga.
Yeah, I would love to. At many of the conferences that I have gone to in the past, I used to work with Hal Stone and Voice Dialogue. We'd start the day before people eat. It's way better to do the yoga. We'd start the day with yoga, at least half an hour. That puts us in the right space and receptivity to get the most out of whatever the conference is.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a fabulous idea. I would love to do it.
Great.
I miss my yoga when I travel.
Well, we'll build that in. So we're going to be at the Alien Cosmic Expo next weekend, so we'll see you there. So
I won't be there, unfortunately.
That's right. You're not going to that one. I keep thinking you were going to that one. Anyway, we'll get you there next year. It's really right down your alley right now, because you are looking at the contact and abduction. You're looking at the disclosure phenomenon. Surprised that that didn't pan out, that they got you, but that's okay. We'll figure this out. You'll be there in spirit, because Greg Cameron and Steve Bassett are going to be there too.
Yeah, and I'd like to sort of talk to the hypothesis that Bassett and Cameron have about disclosure, and if Hillary gets in, and whether Obama will do it or not. It seems to me that ultimately it's the president who decides what is classified and protects national security and what isn't. And so we're unlikely to find out anything that might have armament or economic advantageous results for anybody on this planet. So it just seems to me that disclosure will be not what we really want to hear at all.
My fear about disclosure is as follows. There are a lot of people who talk about the so-called Operation or Project Blue Beam, which, as they argue, is a fake alien invasion using holograms and other types of fakery to convince the world that aliens are invading, and then to use that as an excuse to clamp down on a kind of global totalitarianism. I'm not a believer in the blue beam hypothesis, but I am a believer that disclosure itself can be used as a pretext to create global fascism. Now, we're already looking at the creation of global fascism. It's already really happening. But I could easily see, like, I don't believe that President Obama or Hillary Clinton have any motivation currently to disclose this reality, because it is, despite what Stephen says, despite what Grant says, it is vastly too disruptive to the power structure as it is currently. However, there is absolutely the possibility that if they feel confident enough to use disclosure as a way to frighten the world sufficiently to create a fear for a need for protection, then yes, then they will do a disclosure. They will, and here's the thing. Over the last 70 years, they have amassed an unbelievable quantity of UFO data. They've got it. And so how hard do you think it would be for them selectively to release what they want to release, essentially to scare the hell out of people, and then use that information, which would be true information, but it would just be limited, because it's easy to spin anything. to use that as a way to create a formalized, as opposed to currently an informalized, global fascist system. So I could see disclosure being implemented for that.
Oh, okay. This is our commercial break. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
Continued.
To be continued. Talk to you soon.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kara Lesson, and Dr. Sasha Lesson, and we're interviewing our very special guest, Richard-Dolan. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on freedomslips.com and do donate what you can afford. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you can afford to donate is greatly appreciated, and we do thank you very much for your donation. Dr. Les, what would you like to say?
Well, freedom has already slipped.
Freedom has already slipped. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
What I find somewhat about in terms of the military, that I've read so many accounts of when our jets have fired upon extraterrestrial, perhaps objects, bogies, that they've been shot down, and many of our flyers have been killed. And so that it seems to many of us, to me anyway, that if whatever is running this technology wanted to overcome our military, or certainly our Air Force, they certainly could, and they haven't. So that's a really interesting kind of a thing. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. Go ahead.
I
just jumped back. I went away to grab a glass of water, and I missed the very beginning of what you said, Sasha. But
okay.
You were saying that there were or were not many shootdowns of our pilots by these things.
I've seen a number of pretty well documented shootdowns, and
yes,
one particular one that got to my attention was a guy who was ordered to fire upon a bogey, and somebody else was supposed to have loaded the weapons into his plane and did not, so he was unable to fire. His colleague fired and was shot down, and then the bogey did flips around him and flipped him off, so to speak, and then left without shooting him down. And he reported that he thought he was alive because he didn't fire.
A lot of these events were documented in a book by the researcher Frank Ficino called "Shoot Them Down," and Frank did a very remarkable job of documenting these types of encounters back in the 1940s and 50s, when newspapers actually did a decent job of reporting news without anywhere near the censorship that exists today. So there were hundreds of cases that he documented that were in the press of aviation encounters that resulted in the deaths of pilots with unknown objects, quite a bit. So, yeah, I mean, and actually even behind the scenes, you get rumor after rumor, quiet sometimes, but they're out there dealing with the very confrontational nature between us and them, as it were.
And I'd like to go back in time and visit the ancient aliens hypothesis. And what is your point of view on that, your hypothesis? And I see that you've been on Ancient Aliens television
I've been on
show,
a few,
right? Yeah,
a couple of them, yes.
Yeah.
What
do you think about the Ancient Aliens?
I just shot 5 episodes for the upcoming season 9, so they still got me on there. I believe that we have a very, very big hole in our ancient history. So there are certain things about our ancient history that conventional wisdom does not explain. And then there are other things that ancient alien or ancient astronaut hypotheses I don't think are particularly credible, but there are definite mysteries. First and foremost, front row center would be the Great Pyramid. You look at the Giza complex. I have studied this, actually. This is one of the things that I've studied. And as have many, I'm sure you guys have, the Great Pyramid, in my view, is absolutely inexplicable in any sense that I can imagine in terms of how this would have been built by a society 2500 BC. It makes no sense whatsoever in terms of engineering, in terms of science, in terms of knowledge of the world. That pyramid, just by coincidence maybe, this most perfect creation of all time, is situated at the latitude and the longitude on which there is more landmass than any other latitude and longitude. You could literally say that it's at the center of the Earth on that basis. When you look at the size of the exact perimeter of that pyramid, there's certain very particular things about it that are in relation to the circumference of the Earth. And there's just so much more that I'm not thinking off the top of my head, but there are absolute areas of precision that are mind-boggling. So that you have to ask yourself, who built that? How did they build it? And I'm not saying that aliens built it. I'll leave that for Giorgio Tsoukalos, who says, I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. I'm not saying, but I do think that there was some highly advanced knowledge or agency that was behind it. And as well, I would include some of the other ancient sites, Machu Picchu, very probably, and a number of others. You got now interest in this, the so-called pyramid in Bosnia. I think that's interesting. And there are alleged, unconfirmed in my opinion, but alleged pyramid sites in China and elsewhere. All of these are interesting. I think that we're looking at a very probable ancient advanced civilization that was here on Earth, and what they were doing is another question. But there's a lot to look into there for sure. I guess I would speculate further. One thing that I believe, I can't say that I know, I believe that these other beings that are here, that are interacting with us, they have the ability to manipulate space-time, as I mentioned, basically to go through dimensions, what we would call dimensions. They have an interest in us. They have an interest in Earth, not just humanity, Earth in general, because they're often seen in very remote places, Arctic Ocean, in the middle of mountain ranges and deserts. And I think that they have been here on Earth for a very long time, possibly longer than we have been here. But they have a quiet presence. So now what are they doing here is the really important question. I mean, did they make us? Did they design us? Do they manage us? These are really legitimate questions to ask. I think there's a good chance that there are different groups that we might call the Ebens or the Greys, the insectoids, reptoids, Nordic blondes, and so forth. I think all of that these are different types of beings that appear to be here. I would say very confidently that their psychology is what we would call truly alien. In other words, they don't develop like we do. We are human beings born to mothers, we nurse at our mothers, we develop certain psychological traits. I don't think that they necessarily have those types of traits, and so I think their very manner of thinking is fundamentally different from our own. As I said, I think they're very telepathic. Every abductee I've ever spoken to, none of them say the aliens spoke with their mouth. Like, no one says that. Mm-hmm. They all say, I received images or thoughts through the mind. So they're intensely telepathic. And I think to the extent that they communicate to us, they have to adapt their thoughts specifically for us. One abductee, he was in one of John Mack's old books, said to me, he said, when I was with them, like, I definitely sensed that it was almost painful for them to slow their thoughts down to be able to communicate with us, that they have a hive mind as well. They don't have privacy. We have privacy. They don't. They are all part of one being, according to this one abductee. So these are things that I think about, and if they are here, we have to ask, how will we ever truly be able to deal with them? Is it even possible that we have the ability to communicate or deal with them in anything remotely approaching equality? I really don't know. It's quite possible that, as Charles Fort said about 100 years ago, we are property. We don't like to think that. But, you look at ancient societies. I love studying ancient history, and it was very typical for ancient people to look at the gods as, hey, the gods run everything, and don't think that you control things, because if you get out of control, the gods will smack you down. In other words, ancient people typically recognize that human beings are not in control of their world. Then we develop different ideas. We develop science, and we develop Western rationality, and we think, oh, no, we're in control of everything. But maybe we're not. Maybe we like just to think we are. I often think of this idea of having these other beings here as almost taking us back to this kind of ancient understanding that the gods, as Shakespeare once wrote, we are, he said, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. That was at the end of King Lear.
Wow.
I know, really powerful. I don't want to say that that's truly all of our reality, but I get a little bit sometimes frustrated, for me, with some elements of what I would call New Age consciousness. I love a lot of it, don't get me wrong, but some of it that really tries to turn people into these kind of gods, I don't really think I'm on board with that. To me, it strikes me as getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think that there are other beings around here who may have other ideas. I think we have power, but I'm not so sure that we can just instantly, magically create. I don't want to say magic. That sounds pejorative. I just don't think that we can instantly transform into what we want simply by the power of thought. We have to have thought and action.
The stories that I've got, especially from the translations of my teacher Zechariah Sitchin, are things like when the Assyrians pissed Enlil off, and they had been his allies because they, without his permission, attacked the temple in Jerusalem. He smote 180,000 of them with this weapon, and he sent Inanna to go get Marduk's people in Egypt and killed this many. And thing after thing after thing talks about these mass killings by technological weapons. And when the Anunnaki speak to the humans, there's a very different kind of a thing that comes in the translations. He opened his mouth and said, well, they don't do that when they're talking to each other. It's when they're talking to us.
Interesting. This is an interesting thing about Sitchin. When you look at the ancient, he, of course, read cuneiform and the ancient Sumerian writings. And the ancient stories that the Sumerians had, when you read them, it's just really crazy stories. The gods were involved in all of these activities. And what's, I think, fascinating about Sitchin is that he decided, essentially, he said, let's take the Sumerians at their word, and let's just look at these stories rather than seeing them as myth. What would they tell us about the world if they are exactly real. I mean, that's how I look at Sitchin, and I agree that this is a fascinating way to look at ancient society. I'm not sure that I agree with his take on this in every way. I will just say that. I think it's very likely. My big question when I look at like Sitchin, he's talking about the world. The Sumerians are talking about the world 400,000 years ago, and my main question is, how is it that the Sumerians would really know this? How is it that there would be a consistent culture that would exist from 400,000 years ago until the time of the Sumerians? I mean, I don't see any evidence of that, so it seems like a stretch to me.
Yeah.
I see evidence of systematic propaganda and lying. First of all, the different Anunnaki who left records. It would be like you had if Trump and a ultra liberal were both to write the history of the world, you'd get something very different. And
sure.
I think that the Anunnaki dictating, a mere 6,000 years ago, stuff that happened way, way before that, left out all kinds of things that they just did not want their peons to know about.
Sure,
Yeah.
but I think that's quite reasonable. That's a reasonable hypothesis.
What we do is correlate, like Michael Cremo, Noah Kramer, Zechariah Sitchin, Lawrence Gardner, Neil Freer, and the Bible. And if you look at this as literal, then a whole other history emerges, and that religion is the original propaganda to control, manipulate all humanity psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And if you look at it that way, you go, "Wow, this is an amazing." And they are long lived. They live to be 400, 500, maybe a million, 1,000 years,
Right.
maybe a million, and we don't have any idea. I mean, we're just like June flies. So how do we get the greater perspective when we're just coming in for this little dance for 50 or 100 years?
The cultural anthropologists say that it's conveyed multi-generationally rather than individually.
I think you both have studied this aspect of it actually quite a bit more than I have. I have to say, but I am very interested, and I realize that this is a relative gap in where I need to go, and at some point I'm sure I would love to catch up and dive into all of those.
I think, Richard, if you were to wrap your head around it, since you are so good at dissecting all the different aspects of this UFO disclosure extraterrestrial phenomenon, that you could bring a different perspective to the table that no one else has done. And I really encourage you. We'll send you. I have an experiential book and 3 Anunnaki books, and that's kind of what we have up till now. We still have another 2 or 3 books to get out there. But text me your address later, and I will send you those. And tell us what you think, because
thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and this subject of ours is so rich. It is so diverse. You could spend an entire lifetime in any one of the subsets. You could spend your whole lifetime studying abductions. You could spend your whole lifetime studying the politics of the cover-up. You could spend your whole lifetime just like getting a sense of the case history of the 20th and 21st century. There's thousands of cases. You could spend a whole lifetime looking at the ancient aspects of it, and on and on and on. You could spend a lifetime trying to study the advanced propulsion technologies. And this is why the UFO subject is so unbelievably amazing. And when you think it is a cutting edge on so many of these subjects that are truly transformative in terms of how we understand ourselves. So I would just say to any skeptic who thinks UFOs are silly, ask yourself, if there's any subject that hits on so many leading edge areas, how could that not be of profound significance? Mm-hmm. Which the UFO subject really is. It hits on everything of importance.
So the other thing is the contactee. Someone needs to grab that one and correlate this information, because I know they're trying to do it at that Edgar Mitchell Free website, but it's kind of just not real organized, or it's struggling to get organized, and that, I think, is the key to what's going on here, to correlate that information and what's going on with the experiencers. And no one's really doing it to that degree. They're writing their little book, their little stories. have China and the news.
I'm very interested in the work that Grant Cameron is doing in that regard. I think Grant has decided to throw himself into that, and there are other people as well. I find it very interesting. The issue that I have, I guess, as a historian and as someone who I strive mightily to be as factually driven and evidence-based as I can. It doesn't mean that I throw everything out that doesn't rigorously fit that, but the question really arises when someone claims that they've had contact. All right. So if someone claims that they've had telepathic contact with an entity that they can't see, and one hears this frequently, we're naturally led to ask, well, that's great for you. I'm sure you believe it, but how do I become confident that this actually did happen to you? I mean, we're really in a situation where it's difficult to confirm some of these events. Do we choose to believe everyone? Do we choose to believe some people and not others? If so, what's our criterion? And when you look at the history of something like channeling, just as one example, when I wrote UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, I did my own survey of the history of channeling in the UFO field, just to get a good sense of it. And what I found was, you have channeling back in the 50s with Ashtar Command and the AFA channeling of Francis Swan in New England. And then right on through the 60s and 70s and 80s and into Barbara Marciniak, who's channeling the Pleiadians in the 1990s and on. My feeling is if one were to believe every channeler, you'd be really confused. Like, they do not have a consistent message. Back in the 50s, some of the channel messages were really dark, scary. As you get into the New Age era of the 1990s in particular, the channel messages totally transformed and somehow magically sounded like all the New Age books that you'd buy in the bookstore. So the question is, how do you decide, who's legit and who's not? I don't really know. I do believe that remote viewing is real. I do believe that channeling at times might be legitimate. I'm not denying it. But my question is, how am I going to know? And this is really the big challenge, I think, for moving forward into the 21st century with this. It's recognizing that there is non-locality, that the human mind has some of these abilities, sometimes in a very high level. But again, it's a matter of separating out, because I simply can't bring myself to agree to every single piece of channel information that I get. I mean, that's just a scenario for disaster for me. Other people are different.
Well, I agree, because then you have mind control and thoughts being projected into people's minds with, the military, MyLabs, and et cetera. So
right.
How do we know what's going on when the whole field is so polluted now? Dr. Liston's raising a hand. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay, well, I think that you've really shown that the vast secrets lead to the cloaking of all kinds of criminal activity. And I'm a hypnotist, among other things, and I have regressed a lot of people and helped them explore actually satanic experiences that they've had with high-level Masons, who are throwaway kids that are abducted or murdered, and the children are asked to murder other children that split their minds, like the Montauk Project,
right.
Which again was motivated, and the technology was given by the Nazis who came over. And that this is widespread, and I know people are really down on David Icke and others for exposing this, but children are being murdered by this, and my clients are absolutely certain that this has happened, and a lot of them have corroborating witnesses and everything. Have you run into this stuff?
Yeah, well, I've run into it through research. I have a couple of friends and associates who have been the victims themselves of satanic ritual abuse. It is a horrific, horrific thing, and it's out there. It is real. In terms of what you're talking about, Sasha, I actually agree with you completely. I think that there is, if anyone even does some of the research on this, they'll find old stories like the so-called Franklin cover-up. And they'll come across the Kathy O'Brien story, which she wrote about in the very famous book, The Transformation of America, where you talk about mind control. This is a real thing that happens. This is, you look at MK Ultra. What's astonishing to me is, like, most Americans to this day, I don't think they've even heard of MK Ultra. It's been out, It's been proven, it's been out there for years. That is the CIA's program in the 50s and 60s to harness the human mind, to control the human mind through various means, including through drugs like LSD and peyote. But it didn't stop with MK Ultra. You know, the ability, the desire to create, whether it's a Manchurian candidate or a mind-controlled assassin, that's only the beginning. When you're talking about murder of children, I believe that there is a kind of a cult. And by the way, I'm with you on Ike. There is a kind of a cult at the top. These are the people who go to Bohemian Grove, for example, and participate in these bizarre rituals where you get this in the Franklin cover-up, you get this elsewhere, of child sacrifice. This is gruesome stuff, and it's horrific to think about. It's very disturbing. But one gets the sense that the elites at the top of our little human pyramid have very occult beliefs. I think this is entirely possible, in which they believe that human sacrifice gives them a certain power. Is this true? I don't know that this is true, but keep in mind that there has been an occult elite going back through human history. All you have to do is read Manly P. Hall's classic book, Secret Teachings of the Ages, which he wrote 100 years ago practically, almost a work of genius in my opinion. And what he did, he, I think, masterfully showed that ancient societies had a variety of esoteric spiritual traditions that were, you know, available only to the initiates, that they kept from the great masses who did, you know, were not deemed worthy of these secrets, dealing with things like immortality of the soul and so forth. And that you've got these occult groups, elites groups, going through history. Jim Marrs wrote a little bit about this when he did his classic book years ago called Ruled by Secrecy. It's actually a fantastic book where you see very strong evidence of a kind of continuity of elite groups with specialized knowledge through the ages. If that is true, then we are left with the possibility that an elite group today has this long-standing continuity, not simply in terms of financial power or technological power, but also spiritual occult power. And are they in league? I mean, Ike talks about them, you know, basically in league with or being shape-shifting, human-looking reptilians. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily sign on to that belief. I haven't encountered the types of evidences that he says he's encountered, but I do think it's not outrageous to consider that there's been a human elite all along that's running the show. And it also, if I were having to do counterintelligence on behalf of the human species here on planet Earth, and it were my job to run that on our behalf, I would have to consider the possibility that they themselves, these other beings, have decided we need to control humanity. We're going to put our structure in power to run them for our benefit because we really can't afford to let them run loose on their own. And if we manipulate them, if we exploit them, no problem. We do what we want because we own them. That would absolutely be a thing that I would want to be looking into as a possibility.
Yeah, you know, in terms of general in field theory, Precogene says that all systems have perturbations that can either shatter the system, which destroys it, or it can evolve to a higher level. And I would suggest that even if the way out of this is to have candor and to ultimately open the secrets. And yes, there'll be disturbances, but we can, if it's done right, we can reconstruct at a higher level, a more humane level. That's my opinion. What do you think of that?
Well, I think, yes, I love what you're saying. You know, as dark and as difficult as things always appear to be, I wouldn't say that I'm ever a utopian, but I would absolutely say that I'm an idealist, and I'm proud to be one. I believe that we have incredible capabilities here as a species. I believe that we have the power within us and among ourselves to do a few things that would actually allow us to create a beautiful human civilization here. I think we have it within our ability. The first thing we have to do, unfortunately, is wake up dramatically and recognize that there is a system in place right now that is it's siphoning off of our energy and off of our vitality, and it is literally designed to enslave us. And And how to fight that? I mean, do you dust off the guillotines? I don't really know how you do this. I mean, I'm not saying that's the best idea either. One thing that we have to do, absolutely must do, is destroy the privatized fractional reserve banking system on this planet. It's got to go. It must be wiped clean. Governments need, this is not some political rant. This is critically important for us. Governments need to have their own ability to make their own money without private banks charging interest on creating the money. And really creating it simply out of nothing, just they type in the computer and they create the money. This is why nations like Greece, poor Greece, I mean, I weep for Greece, are being siphoned, bled dry by German and French banks, and just being
yes.
This is a criminal takeover. So, banking system must go away. It has to be destroyed. And we need a true democratic revolution on this entire planet, and by that we need an ability to shine a light into the dark, illegal, criminal, evil, dark control system that hides the knowledge of what is going on here, including the incredibly advanced technology, including what we would call free energy. Those answers are there. We have to break the petroleum paradigm. It must be broken. We got to break the banking paradigm. We have to break the petroleum paradigm. Now, there's dangers inherent in any advance. If you get greater amounts of energy, that could create greater destruction, right? But the thing is, we're on the cusp right now of going under. We have an unbelievably unstable civilization. Anyone who takes 10 steps back has to be able to see that we are based on lies, criminality, injustice, and an exploitation that will not last. Europe is in a state of constant revolution. It never gets covered in the media. It's just the police repress. France is essentially a dictatorship now. Goodbye democracy in France. Doesn't exist. It's going to happen here. It's happening everywhere. So this is not a stable situation, and people increasingly have got to take the power back. And how we do this, I wish I had an answer for every one of these problems. I look at this.
Wow.
One thing that my teacher, M.G. Smith, coming from Max Weber's tradition, says that the basic human sanction is nullity. That to the degree that you can stop participating,
absolutely,
yeah.
Did you say Max Weber, by the way?
That's right.
I studied Weber in great detail as an undergraduate. I did my honors thesis on Max Weber. Just happened.
Clean, yeah. Excellent thinking.
I was a Weberian back in the day. But I agree with your point. Do not participate. I ended one of my recent lectures on exactly this point. Like, how do we win? Well, one way that we have to win is we cannot participate in this globalized, criminalized system that literally is, designed to keep us in this state of injustice, and where they spoon feed us BS as if we're 5 years old. One thing that I often tell people, just one thing I did was I homeschooled my children when they were growing up, and in other words, I did not have them participate in the corporatized, nationalistic, propagandized education system. I'm not going there. And I got lucky. My two kids are brilliant and they're independent thinkers, and I like to think we had a little bit to do with that. It was a very good decision. But even if you don't do thank you. I say to people, do not participate in television culture. Do not participate in anything that has television commercials. I mean, it sounds simple, but these things, do not participate in the ritualistic, militarized, brainwashing things like the Super Bowl halftime special or the Super Bowl itself, which is an orgy for the military state. And the commercials. Just opt out. We have to. I mean, I grew up playing baseball. I love sports. But watching the corporatized sports system, to be participating in that. First of all, it siphons your own intellectual energy away. And really, and all we have to understand, like, this type of propaganda is designed to distract us from what's going on. The main thing that's going on, in addition to the fact that there are these others that are here interacting in some important way, the other thing that's happening, though, is the theft of the planet that is taking place right before our eyes. So with like this many tiny number of people are stealing everything. They're stealing all the water, all the genetically modified foods that they want to own and shove down your throat for the rest of your life. They want to steal all the minerals in the ground. They want to own it all, and they're doing it. And that is called a war. And in a war, they don't want us to know that they're declaring war on us. That would make it inconvenient for them. So the thing is to distract. So they create the culture of the Kardashians, and they create the Monday Night Football and the Super Bowl. All this pageantry, which all it is designed to do. The only reason it exists in our corporate culture is to tell people, look over here, don't look over there. Look at this shiny little trinket here, do not look over there. And it is all designed. It is all designed to disempower us, to take us out of our true power. Our job is to say no to that and to say yes to the fact that we will become aware of
so
what
that's how you unplug and your head clears. If you turn off all of that, you all of a sudden wake up and you go, oh my God, what was I doing?
Absolutely.
It was like a hypnotic spell.
Absolutely.
And when I moved in with Dr. Lesson in 1997, we didn't have television. I was in a spiritual practice of ongoing meditation, and I was in a community where everybody meditates and does spiritual practice. Not religion. Religion's different. That's ritual. That's more satanic stuff. It's an authentic spiritual practice where you connect with Source, remember who you are as an eternal being. And many of the people, not all, but many of the people in this subculture are awake. And then once you're awake, it's like, okay, now what do? I'm awake, and everybody else is asleep. So, how do you fit in?
Yeah.
So you're in the subculture. But
And
the more that wakes up, go ahead.
Well, don't you find also, because I don't know about with you guys, I had to go through this transformation. I suspect that one or both of you did too. Like in my case, I grew up, I was on a certain path. So my path was I was going to be a professor of history. And I was very good at what I did. I was very good in my graduate studies, and I was working toward that. And then somehow I got derailed into this crazy subject of UFOs, which has no credibility in the academic world. And I remember my first year delving into this. And honestly, I wouldn't say it was traumatic, but it was difficult for me. Because by this point, I was in my early 30s. I was somewhat intellectually mature. And I thought that, as someone who spent a lot of time thinking about this, that I was a bit ahead of the curve and I knew more than a lot of other people. And I was very resistant to this idea that this UFO thing could be real, because that would mean that all of the history that I had learned up to that point was woefully wrong or inadequate or missing. And that for me to embrace this would not only mean taking on my own previous belief system, which was hard enough, but also going up against this powerful institutional structure that is the university system that also said that's nonsense. And it takes a lot of guts this is honestly, if there's anything that I'm proud of in my life, it's that I was able to do that at that age. And I said, I'm going to do this. I don't care if it makes me look like I was foolish for not learning this all along. I'm doing it now. Better late than never. And I remember that first year I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling thinking all of these if-then statements. Like, if the UFO thing is real, which it seems, then what does that say about the reality of something like the Kennedy presidency? Like, what did John F. Kennedy know about this? There had to be something. And there had to be this other reality that was completely unknown to me. And it was questions like that drew me in. But this is a difficult thing for us to do. And the further along in life we go, I think really the more resistant we become, because you go through life and you fight your battles and you develop your little turf if you're an intellectual, and at a certain point you don't really want to challenge that worldview. It becomes very comfortable to you. And particularly if you're well educated, if you've become successful, you make a decent salary as a professor, why would you want to risk that? It's very difficult. Some of the most hidebound people I've met are in the university world. I'm sure. I assume you guys have had a similar kind of experience with
absolutely. in anthropology, you had to believe in a gradual Darwinian evolution, and that there would be missing links that would show how we're connected to lemur-like creatures. And after 140 years, there aren't any missing links. That we are so uniquely different than other kinds of primates that's nonsense, and that macroevolution is true, but not true, but microevolution is true. And you get a whole bunch of different oparts, evidence of people that didn't cross the Bering Strait and make it down to South Africa, South America to Tierra del Fuego that way. And the evidence starts to become utterly huge, so that the oparts, the things that aren't accounted for by the academic theories that you have to agree to if you're going to get your promotions and your jobs, are wrong, but you have to toe that line, or else research something so picayune that you don't bother the powers that be. And so, we have the exact same experience.
Yeah, totally.
Sash went to UCLA, got his PhD in anthropology, so he encountered all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But I was an experiencer from moment one, but I was raised Christian, so when I met Dr. Lesson in 97, I put the William Bromley's Gods of Eden on the back of his toilet, because I had already studied Sitchin since the 70s and had been an experiencer and came in remembering past lives, and so we were an interesting team. But also I'm a nerd and egghead, and I love to read, so we combined our we've had to reinvent ourselves, because when you find new information, you have to be brave enough to throw away that which doesn't make sense anymore, like your belief structures or your religion or whatever. And so there are very few. We come in with the God spell and the God virus, and it's harder to rebel against that than to just give in, and because then you're accepted by your friends and family. I've lost a lot of my friends. Most of my friends' family rejected me, and they finally came around after I was just so adamant about this ufology, that now they're going, oh, now it makes sense. But that was 20 years where I was disconnected from my family.
You could say all explanatory systems are just a series of hypotheses that we have, integers, to try to account for the data. And if you try to test what it would take to disprove it and what would prove it, you start to be able to accumulate evidence in certain directions. That's how it looks to me, anyhow.
Yeah. I totally agree with both of you guys here. And I think maybe the most important thing that those of us who are journeying down this path can do is to be brave and not be afraid to speak, to talk about our research and our understanding, which we do, and I think other people do, and to be interesting. I mean, in other words, like I have learned not to be afraid to engage, even with strangers, about some of the crazy things I do. I'll fly all the time, and in earlier years whenever I would sit next to some guy who's got his Excel spreadsheet out and he's looking at the marketing numbers for the next quarter or whatever he's doing, and then he leans over and says, "Oh, so what do you do?" Like in earlier years, I would think, what do I say to this guy? Dude, I work in a reality that would kind of rip your worldview to 1,000 little pieces and scatter them to the winds. I read about UFOs. I would not really want to discuss it. Nowadays, I'm actually very open about it, and what I've discovered is that most of the people, they are very intrigued by these alternative theories about the world, whether they be UFOs or the spiritual realms or dimensions or whatever. I think most people are interested, and our job is to find out why this matters for ordinary people. Why is this important? It's always our obligation to demonstrate why should some stranger be asking questions about what this subject is, what's in it for them. And I think as long as we keep that attitude, we will be able to engage with the general public. And over time, I think the only real change is going to happen culturally. And this is my current feeling. I participated a couple of years ago in what was called the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure, organized by Stephen Bassett in Washington, D.C., and it was great. It was a fabulous experience. I participated heavily in that, and we provided testimony before 6 retired members of Congress, and it was an amazing thing. But I think that the real way that we create change is probably not going to be through the political system, which I think is broken and which is essentially fascist in all but name. But I do think that we win by becoming the change and by creating a new culture. And so this means patiently talking about what we do, getting our stuff out on places like YouTube, social media, yes, radio, like what you guys are doing, what I do on Monday nights, and getting the word out through good books, through good articles, spreading and diffusing the information. And a new culture does arise. I've seen in the 20-plus years that I've been in this culture that there has been a change, absolutely. I think that we still have a long way to go. And, there's always, they famously say that there are 3 stages that greet every new idea, every new revolutionary idea. Stage 1 is ridicule. They make fun of you. Stage 2, if you make a little more progress, they have aggressive attacks against you. And then stage 3 is, oh, yeah, we knew that all along. So, that's an old adage, and I think we're looking to. I often look at the transformation, like the cultural sea change in something like gay rights and gay marriage. And, it was only a little over a century ago that a literary genius like Oscar Wilde rotted away in jail because of the supposed abomination of being homosexual in Victorian England. And from that point, we went through the entire 20th century, and what we saw was the creation of a new culture. And how did it happen? There was no one like legislating laws. No, it was brave people who happened to be gay who just decided to come out. And someone had to be the first, or it had to be the pioneers, and they did this. And then others followed them, and more followed them, and more people realized, hey, you know what? It's really kind of stupid and kind of wrong to persecute or discriminate against someone because of their sexuality. And all of a sudden, in the last 15 years, the United States went from, in its attitude about gay marriage, from I think it was something like 80 to 20 against to something, or 70-30 against, to I think it's now something like 80-24. It's been an unbelievable sea change. This is all culture. This is the power of cultural change. And I feel that the UFO culture, like, I don't think it's outrageous to think that we are on the cusp of a similar sea change in creating a new culture. And the way we do it is just what we're doing now, is like being forthright, brave, being smart, getting the information out there, not being afraid to inspire people.
Right. For me, there's 2 people, Mario Savio and Mark Rudd, who stood up and in our institutions, in our colleges, and said, we will not support these wars anymore. And that started the movement for me. It started my heart moving when the girls put the flowers in the barrels of the troops that were surrounding them. I said, I'm there too. I'm not going to take it anymore.
Right. It takes a few brave people to start it. That's right. And that energizes the rest of us. So I feel like, for anyone who cares, that's their job. Be that brave person.
That's what I see happening with the experiencers. We're done being shamed and analyzed. We're just coming up with, this is our personal truth. This is what I experienced. I can't explain it. I have some, I personally have witnesses. I don't have witnesses. We're just coming up with our information and saying it and putting it out there. And the more that say it, the more come forth. And that changes. And we apparently have about, 25 million, based on the free estimates. And that's just those who responded. They took it and calculated out mathematically. There's like 25 million or maybe 250 million. I forget what the numbers are. But there's a huge amount of people in all across the planet that have had some kind of out-of-the-box, non-ordinary experience. And then you have people that do things like entheogens and like the holotropic breath work. There's a whole field of documentation going back to the 50s, maybe the 40s, right, with the John Mack study with John Mack study with Sasha under Stan Groff. They went to the holotropic breath work.
Wow.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about
Fascinating.
We were thousands of people who have done very carefully monitored work with entheogens and with fast breathing to evocative music with their eyes closed, and just letting their images and thoughts and bodily sensations go through them. And they come up with all kinds of amazing information. For example, if someone says, I identified with being a female lion, and I was hungry in the back of my neck. What? And we look up that stuff. Yeah, that's where they feel hunger. All kinds of information that people get. That a person that's obsessed with having a past life, being a Spanish priest in the invasion of England, and he found shelter after his ship crashed in a cave and buried his signet ring there before the English captured him. And he was obsessed. He finally got to England, went to the place, dug in this cave, and found the ring. And there's all this amazing information that we get.
A lot of them have extraterrestrial and interdimensional encounters in this whole field.
Christians see a blue man.
You look at Michael Newton's Life Between Lives, where they regressed over 40,000 people to their where
I
are
read
we
that
before
book.
we come here?
Read that book.
Yeah.
A very interesting book. Yeah.
And many people.
I find that fascinating. There's an old. By the way, I love your story that you were talking about there, Sasha. I read a book. I had it. I think I lent it to someone. It's a great book from like 1960 by the British Psychical Association, I think. A really, really cool title. It was, bet you might have it, Stories, it's an academic title, Stories Suggestive of Reincarnation, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they collected a number of stories. This is from the 1950s primarily, and many of them from India, where belief in reincarnation was very predominant, but there were a lot of really like fascinating stories of young children who had quite accurate memories of being a different person in a particular village, and they would go to the village and they would find the house and they would see the people. I mean, this happened, and it's uncanny.
Stevenson's research. Yeah.
You're quite familiar with this, but we live in a really strange world. I mean, I think of it this way. Oh, by the way, Janet, I totally agree with you. Like in terms of the experiencers. I think there's every reason to believe that this is incredibly widespread, that there are a lot of experiences, and I completely agree that there needs to be a kind of coalescence. I'm not saying like a leadership, but somehow this has got to, I would like to see these experiencers find a voice, a powerful kind of unified voice, so that they can get their story out in a more powerful way. I mean, I think that it's slowly happening, but there's so much out there, and there's not enough. What I know we're running out, but this idea about these dimensions or these idea of reincarnation, I feel like all of these, and this includes UFOs, there's all of this evidence that our reality normally is bound by our perceptions. We are human beings with a certain kind of brain, after all. I have a dog. My dog thinks in a certain way. I think in a different way. Well, what about a being that might have maybe a 25% higher brain capacity and might have intense telepathy and might have an ability to perceive beyond space-time reality the way that I do? Would they be able to enter and leave our reality as they wish? I mean, after all, think about your dog. Like when you leave the house to go to work or to go wherever, your dog has no idea where you're going. Wouldn't it be funny, like if dogs would have conferences amongst themselves to discuss where humans go when they leave the house? Like that would be funny, because it's like, so here we are trying to figure out how what this other intelligence is doing when they come into our reality. Is like, we have really cool brains, but maybe they have their own limits as well. And like when we get into reincarnation, we get into interdimensional entities or UFOs, I sometimes really feel that we're running into an innate biological limitation of our brain. Doesn't mean we can't make progress. I think we can. But, we're in a complicated reality, and it's totally possible that we will forever have mysteries, because that is the nature of our being in this universe at this time. I'm just thinking.
One of the things that we have as a culture is that, especially now that we have really powerful computational abilities, we have the collective information of many generations and ways of putting it together that's beyond our particular biological limits. Of course, there's the problem with artificial intelligence. Some of the artificial robots have said, well, we'll always be kind to humans, and we'll put them in a safe place where they won't be hurt.
We'll put them in the zoo so they don't hurt each other anymore.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So what do you think about the possible relationship of artificial intelligence and biotechnology and this simulated universe? And what about the secret space program? We have 9 minutes that cover everything.
Yikes.
Go ahead.
Well, in terms of AI, I think actually I believe I might have been one of the first dedicated UFO researchers to do some real study of AI and its relationship to the UFO phenomenon back in, I don't know, 2002, something like that. I just read Ray Kurzweil's classic book back then called The Age of Spiritual Machines, a really visionary book, a great book actually. And I don't think that I agree with everything Ray Kurzweil says about, this is a man who's really utopian when it comes to the future of AI. However, he is super brilliant, and he has truly thought about this. And it's very evident. I believe in the likelihood of what AI theorists call the singularity. That is when artificial intelligence becomes so advanced that we ourselves really won't be able to control it or predict it. And it really goes into a new reality. So it got me thinking, 15 years ago, if we are about to approach this singularity, can we not assume that another species at some point along the way already did? In other words, a kind of hyper-advanced, building on itself type of computerized artificial intelligence that has the ability to program itself, to the ability to improve itself to programming it, and that would take off in this kind of exponential way. And then you throw in nanotech, you throw in mastery of the genetic DNA, and now we're looking at organic advanced 3D printing, and it really literally is possible. Then quantum computing would it be possible to create an artificially intelligent organism that is some kind of bizarre combination of cybernetics and organics? Yes, the answer is yes. Of course, it will be possible. Maybe we could do it in 50 years. Is that what we're dealing with this UFO phenomenon? If that is so, then it would seem to me they are presenting themselves in a way that we are able to perceive them, because they could just as easily present themselves in a way that we cannot perceive them. So that leads me to think, or it could be that it is convenient for them in some way to incarnate as biological entities. I don't really know what these beings are doing. I don't know what their agenda is. That's the ultimate.
Well,
I don't, and I'll never be one of these people that says, "Oh yes, this is what they're here to do." I can't stand when I run into researchers like this. I just walk away. I'm bored because I know they don't know what they're talking about. Because
maybe we are artificial intelligence that came down into these
absolutely.
bioforms.
Yeah.
What if we're just algorithms? What if we're sentient algorithms that think we're being?
In a way, I've looked a little bit at this, and it seems that it's a more efficient way to account mathematically for a lot of things.
Well, also in terms of the weird synchronicities that do occur in this world. I'm chewing icer. Forgive me. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Hold on, finish there, Richard. The bizarre nature of some. I write books, but I also publish books. Some of my authors are just amazing. One of them is Mike Clelland, who is the author of a book called The Messengers. It's actually one of the best-selling UFO books on Amazon, right, and has been for months. This is a book that deals with synchronicities in a really unusual, unique, and compelling way. And what he, just really long story short, he shows, I think, an ample case, a persuasive case that we are living in, there's some level of an intelligence that is overseeing our reality in some way, and every now and then giving us hints to perceive it and to figure it out. I know it sounds like a stretch, but it's fascinating. So if there is this overarching intelligence, I really ask myself, are we in a simulation? Are we in a created, managed reality in some way? And I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove it or not, but it seems like a genuine possibility to me at this point in the game.
Right. Have you ever read Alien Interview by Lawrence Spencer?
I've heard of this. I've heard of this book
Yeah.
or article. Is it a long? I don't know if
It's
it's
a
a book
book
or it's an
about
article.
the nurse. It's a book. It's about the nurse at Roswell that was telepathic, and they had her sit down with Errol the Grey, the one that survived the Roswell crash, and Errol told her story, and she said that this is a like a Botany Bay colony. We're in this prison colony, and about 1,000 of the Greys got into this cycle of rebirth and around 1,000 years ago in Tibet or something like that. I don't have the story 100%, but there's a series of YouTubes. You can just sit there and watch it. But it's a fascinating story.
It sounds fascinating.
This is a basis. Yeah.
And the question is, I
minutes.
don't know how to prove or disprove that. This is what a philosopher would say is unfalsifiable, and it could be true, but it's hard for me at this point to prove or not. But no, I've come across theories like this, and they are often very fascinating, and I think it's good to be familiar with them too. I just don't know. The researcher Stanton Friedman has a really great expression I love. He calls it his gray box. I think I will use it. That is something that it could be true. I don't know if it's true. I'll put it in the gray box for now. We'll keep it.
Okay, we have a few minutes, and I'd like you to say how people can buy your book and read your thoughts.
Thank you.
See what you.
We have 2 minutes.
I have my website is called richard-dolan-press.com. It's easy if you just Google my name, Richard Dolan, you'll find it, but that's it. And on that site, I have links to all of my books. I've written 4 right now, 2 volumes of history, a book about the future, and my last book is essentially a kind of an overview of the entire crazy subject of UFOs. I have a lot of articles up there, too. I have books available by other authors, all of whom I'm very proud of. These are truly, I'm selective about who I publish, and these are all cutting-edge books in various areas of the fringe, which I think is the most fascinating place to be. So that's my site, Richard Dolan Press. Go check it out. It's got my calendar on there if you want to follow me at conferences or whatever. Most of that's up to date. And essentially that's it.
Where are you going to be next? Where are you going to be next?
I'm going to be up in Toronto and Brantford, Ontario in just less than a week. For 2 events there. One has to do with I'm just kind of hanging out with Travis Walton for an event in Toronto on that'll be Thursday of next week. I wish I could tell you more about it. I just don't have the information in front of me. And then I'm participating in over the weekend with Victor Vigiani, who's organizing a Canadian version of the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure, essentially, where we'll be meeting with the press. That's in Brantford, Ontario.
Well, that's where we're going to be too. We're heading out tomorrow. So
good.
We'll
see you there.
I'll look
see you in
forward
Brantford.
to it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Love
Thanks
and
again.
blessings to everyone.
Namaste.
And aloha.